Has anybody ever seen Restaurants on the Edge, which is a restaurant turnaround program on Netflix? Like, it's not very good, is it? I mean, it's nowhere near as good as Gordon Ramsay, I think. No, it's not got the... But there was one episode that I saw that really struck me. If you look on this picture, you'll see the white building. There's a little crowd. That is a restaurant in Malta called Harbour 17. And it's... Did you see the episode? Yeah. It's owned by a guy called Justin Harbour, who played football for Malta, and then, like a lot of footballers, decided what he wanted to do was get into the restaurant business. Whether that was a good idea or not, well, he was on a restaurant turnaround show, so. His obsession was seafood. He was so keen on seafood that he was flying oysters to Malta from Normandy and langoustines in from Norway, because these were the best ones, and he was so into it being like the best ingredients. But of course, he's flying this stuff in every day, and so he's losing money hand over fist. So they bring their team of people in to look at the restaurant and sort it out. And the turnaround plan is amazing. If you pan this camera 100 yards to the right, you will see a beautiful fresh seafood market selling fish pulled out of the Mediterranean waters in front of you there every morning. And the whole plan was, why don't you sell this? But his mind had been so focused on something exotic from somewhere else that he'd missed what was in front of him. And so that I thought was absolutely fascinating. And I see this all the time. I'll give you a couple of other examples. That's a sort of small business example. I suppose you could say the guy had the savvy to get on Netflix, so he wasn't a complete disaster as an entrepreneur. Years ago, I was in a London cafe that looked a lot like this with an old mate of mine, an old school friend, who I've known since I was 9, actually saw him last week. And this was the occasion of the first executive coaching intervention that I ever did. I didn't know it was executive coaching. I didn't get paid for it, but he made millions of pounds. And in fact, I was saying a couple of weeks ago, do you remember that conversation? He said, yes, it was one of the pivotal conversations of my life. So, he's just graduated, and what he wants to do for a living is work for one of the top strategy consultancies, McKinsey, Bain, or Boston Consulting Group. His heart's absolutely set on it. And in each case, he gets to the second round, and then they say, thanks, but no thanks. And he's super intelligent, but I don't think he has quite the personality style that's required to tell CEOs of big corporates that they're wrong, which is, is a certain skill. And he was a bit more intellectually argumentative than that. And he was sitting there, he was thinking, do I go for the next tier of management consultancies, holding his head in his hands? He was really despairing about this because it seemed so close, but so far away. And then he said, oh, I don't know why I don't just go to the city and be a foreign exchange dealer. And I went, well, what would that involve? He said, oh, you buy and sell currencies and they get paid really well and you have to be able to do maths in your head, and I'm really good at doing maths in your head. I don't know why I don't just do that. And I said, well, why don't you do that then? And it was almost as if I'd given him a sort of Zen master's whack across the side of the head. And he suddenly said, like the lights went on, he said, oh, yeah, I'll do that then. So he got a job at Hill Samuel, Merchant Bank, and then went on to HSBC, and he's made millions and millions and millions trading currencies ever since. It's amazing, right? In the first case, Justin Harbour literally has got the answer to his entire business sitting on the dock just outside his restaurant. He's not seeing it. In the second case, my mate is not only seeing the answer, but he's telling me the answer and still not recognizing it. It's weird and fascinating. Right, now a big business. I've given you a small business, I've given you an individual example, now a big business example. Because these ideas that I want to talk about apply at all levels. Lego. Now, Lego is hugely, monstrously successful now, but you may know that about 20 years ago they were in a real pickle. And it was to do with the dynamics in the Lego family. When I say the Lego family, I always think it's not Mr. and Mrs. Lego, having a board meeting. But there's a family that actually owns Lego. And like a lot of these businesses, there are beliefs that they had and loud voices sometimes that maybe weren't the most intelligent voices in the family. And they had this belief. You see, a lot of adults love Lego. And there's a huge adult user community called adult fans of Lego. At the time, Lego found this an affront. Their belief was Lego is for children. And even though adults like playing with it, they shouldn't. Right? So people would say, hey, there's this kind of adult user community, and they all talk to each other, and they've got a lot of money, and they'll buy big kits, and they could be more sophisticated. We could make a packet. And the logic in the family was, no, they shouldn't be playing with Lego. Now, when Jürgen Vignudstorp took over, actually an ex-McKinsey consultant, took over around 20 years ago, one of the things that he did was to say this is bonkers. And now, you may well know, there is this huge adult community, and they advise Lego on their products, they get them involved in product development, they know what's cool and what they'll buy and so on and so forth. So I've tried with these 3 different stories to point at what it is I'm interested in and want to talk about with you today. In the first case, the answer was there, but the person was looking past it. In the second case, they knew the answer. In the third case, they insisted that the answer wasn't the answer, and even if it was the answer, it still wasn't on. It's crazy. But I found going into businesses that this kind of stuff happens all the time. I'm completely amazed by coaching clients who will tell me the answer to their problem. So this idea of having hidden gold in a business, having the answers already, but somehow not being able to see them, I find really, really interesting. And I think, in fact, Topher and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, the real appeal to this is deep in our culture, because it's the ugly duckling. Especially my second friend, the one who became the trader. It's the farm boy who turns out to be a Jedi Knight. You know, it's Cinderella who turns out to be royalty. And we like this idea very much because wouldn't it be nice? But more significantly than that, the reason I think it's so appealing is because often we're right. We have an intuition that there could be more, there should be more, and if you could only find it. So I'd like to show you some ways that I do that with businesses that are written about in the book. It's great for me that you've got the book because I can, you can fill in the gaps yourself. Later on, if I can convince you that it's sufficiently interesting for you to do that. We're going to do some exercises as well, quick ones. I want you to kind of have the experience, hopefully, of finding something that was like, oh, of course. Now, having said that, so these 2 books are based around these ideas. And having said that, I'd like you to have that experience today. I can't guarantee it today because you know how the unconscious mind works. What we can do is we can prime it, but the insight might show up in the next hour. It might show up next week. Have you seen this kind of picture before? If you've seen anything about design thinking, it'll be familiar. Or if you're someone who's a creative, if you do graphic design or you do computer programming, you may be familiar with this. The idea is that you start with a question that might be a bit vague, and then you have to look in lots of different directions because you're not quite sure what direction you're going in. People call that divergent thinking in the jargon. But then, hopefully, what happens is the light bulb goes on and you know how to converge on a solution. You wake up and you go, I know what it is. And all that stuff I've been looking at that's been too messy, I can get rid of a lot of it. It's just, this is the essence, and I can do my project management or my software development. That's the convergent. Today is about more divergent thinking, and then the key word there is incubation. This is the stuff where you wake up one morning with the idea, or you go for a walk and the idea pops into your head. So I hope it will pop into your head in the next 55 minutes. It might. Or it might be next week. Just go with it, okay? I'm going to go through 3 principles. These actually are chapter headings in the book, so you can refer back to them, for finding hidden gold and doing something with it. Discover your hidden resources. Then how can we recombine those in new ways? And I think there might be some synergy with what you were doing with Dan yesterday, from what Topher's told me. And then thirdly, getting the world to teach you what works. I'll say more about that when we get there. So let's look at discovering your hidden resources. I've got this. This is my most complicated slide, I think, and you'll see it a few times, and it's just to see how things are organized. All I want to say at the moment is I've got 3 broad lenses. They overlap with each other, right? So I've talked about entrepreneurial resources, implied resources, underappreciated resources. They're just kind of labels. Once you start asking these questions and thinking in this way, what I find is people go, oh yeah, I get what you mean, and then you come up with lots of new ideas. But we'll use this as 3 ways in, and we'll start with underappreciated or Cinderella resources. So let's do a little exercise to show how this works. So, I'm sure you've all done loads and loads of goal setting. So if I say to you, think about your ambitious aspiration for your business, okay? You can make pictures of how you want your business really to be. Yeah, you've all done that kind of thing. I'd like you to make a bit of a movie of that for yourself that is not you looking at your bank balance and it having a certain number on it. It's not the kind of, oh, I have arrived and here is, or here's the car, or it's what's an everyday, ordinary day in the business the way you want it to be like? What do you find is, so if it's being interviewed on telly, or if it's doing huge deals, or if it's getting out of a helicopter on the top of the bank to discuss something, whatever it is, I want you to imagine a day in the life that you would have that was like, oh yeah, this is what I do, right? So if you were talking about what you do last week, you'd just be matter of fact about the way things are in the business. Think about your business. A day in the life, matter of fact, but at the level that you would really be exciting if that was. Of course, it's natural for me to be on the telly, or of course, it's natural for me to be on the cover of Management Today, or I don't know what it might be. Right? Okay, everybody got something? Yeah? That's 10 out of 10 on a scale. And I want you to now imagine a scale where that's 10 and the complete opposite, nothing's happening at all, is 0. And then ask yourself, where am I on that scale now? Okay, so let me just get a sense of the range. Anybody at 0? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, a few 4s, great. 5s, great. 6, 7s, 8s, okay. 9s, and anybody at 10? Okay. So, fantastic, those are very workable. Can I suggest, only respectfully, that if you're in the sort of 7 or 8, you might want to think about, well, what would 15 be? And make that 15 the new 10. Just to give yourself a little bit more, why not? Why not push the boat further out? For everybody, though, whatever your number is, I'd like you to ask you this question. Let's say you're a 6, right? Usually what we go is, okay, you're a 6, why aren't you a 10? And when you ask the question, why aren't you doing better? What you'll hear is problems. You'll hear lack. You'll hear maybe excuses. Haven't got these resources. This isn't working very well. We need to fix this. We need to get that. Okay? Instead of asking, why aren't I a 10 if you're a 6, ask, why aren't I a 5? What stops us from being a 5 then? And what you should be coming up with is resources. Think about the crappiest, barely breaking even, zombie type of business. Right? As long as it's breaking even, actually a lot of things must be working in that business. And there's probably some passion there. There's some people who really care. They've got customers. They are serving those customers. Otherwise, they wouldn't even, just to get to that point. So I want you to flip your thinking, because I'm sure you're doing a lot better than that. Otherwise, you wouldn't even be in this room. Right? But how often do we go, well, what stops us from being one lower than we think? So what I'd like you to do is this. Take just a few minutes on your own to start with, and then we'll do a little bit of swapping notes. Whatever level you're at, just take a minute, write as many ideas out as you can. What stops you being, if you're at level N, what stops you being at level N minus 1? Give you a minute or so, then I'll give you a shout, and then you can just swap notes with somebody next to you, and they can maybe nudge you for a few more things that you might be looking past and discounting. Okay? Okay. Okay, just to start giving you a flavour of it. Anybody, we haven't got our microphone yet, so you'll have to do it the old-fashioned way. Just maybe 1 or 2 like to share any particular things that you went, oh, okay, that's right, we need to remember that. Can I have a couple of examples? It's not working at the moment, so...
So actually, I very quickly wrote down 6 things. I wrote to 6, and I wrote 6 things. But actually, when I shared them with Suzanne and John here, I realised they'd both mentioned themselves. They'd both mentioned themselves in why they were a higher number, not the lower number, and I hadn't even included myself.
Interesting.
On it.
Yeah.
And yet I'm the content behind everything do. All the content, all the ideas, and I'd forgotten about me.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's an absolutely great one. Yeah. I love that. Thank you. Yeah. One or two more? Yes.
So in our group, we were discussing actually one of the big things is having great processes in place so that, in the case of the guys here, like the fact that their team have got some of those processes in place, that they're following them and so on, means that as the business owners, we're not then getting sucked as much into the day-to-day, which means that we're closer towards the 10 rather than further down the scale.
Great, and you know, when it comes to processes, you know how hard it probably was to get those in place, and you'll hear loads of other business people going, "Oh, wish I had the processes." You know, to recognise those things is starting to look at how much more can you capitalise on is part of it. The other thing, just to say, and incidentally, this was the trigger for the second book, the Committed Action book. This is a phenomenally good thing to do with your people. Right, because a lot of, especially if you're worried about having a culture, which I've done quite a bit of work with law firms over the years. And I remember one lawyer once saying to me, round here, praise is just the absence of blame. As long as you're not being blamed for something, that's your positive reinforcement. And it's so easy for us to think, because we're problem solvers, that we're looking for things to fix rather than what is working that we can build on. If you get your team to do this exercise, you'll have a fantastic conversation. It's very, very energizing. And what I love about it is it's energizing, but without the boosterism. Because it's based on reality rather than, just BS, which is also, we need a lot more boosterism based on reality. Yeah. Great. So that's one of those lenses. Let's look at the other two, because these all overlap. The second one I call entrepreneurial resources. I borrowed a question from a consultant called Adrian Slywotsky, who wrote a lot of great books. Well, we're going back maybe 20, 30 years. This is a fantastic question, which is this. What resources do you have, apart from money, that an entrepreneur would love? So a simple example, if you wanted to start a fintech business, one of the things you would love is to be able to go and talk to the chief technology officer of big banks. That would be really, really helpful for you to test your value propositions. But they won't talk to you if you're a startup entrepreneur. If you're IBM, however, you just ring them up. So the ability, that access, is an entrepreneurial resource. And there's lots of different kinds. I've got about 17 categories in the book, so you can go and look at those. I'm just going to talk you through a few on page 68, if I remember correctly. And that's not because I know my book down to that. It's just that I put it on a slide. So let me give you a few examples to give you the sort of thinking, right? These are all big businesses, but the principles are the same. The reason I use big businesses for these is because you'll have easy for you to make a picture of what the business is. You know the business, and it's relatable. But these are very flexible principles. So GE makes all kinds of things. They make things like turbines, among others, and they have telemetry on those turbines. So what they've learned is what it's like for the people who are using those turbines, what the circumstances are, when they work, when they break down, how to optimize them, all kinds of things about how to use the technology and integrate it into your operations. They've learned these insights that nobody else knows. That is a source of data that can then be used to do consulting, customer happiness, customer result, customer improvement, as add-on services that you can wrap around the fact that you sold somebody the kit. So that's an example, because unless you're GE and you know that piece of kit operating, nobody else has got that data. That's very proprietary. Another similar example talked about to Matthew Crummock, who was the CEO of Go Compare for the book, is Go Compare see buyers and sellers in a market, and they can see the transactions and who buys what and how. That's very, very useful information that they can use to help both sides of the transaction, and they've done that in various ways. Coca-Cola, okay, people usually, when you say Coca-Cola as a business example, people think about brand. But they also have a phenomenal distribution network. You can get Coke anywhere. In fact, I think that was their vision at one point, was a Coke within arm's reach of everybody in the planet, whether you think that's a good vision or not. But they developed a superb distribution network, and one of the things that they've used that distribution network to do is drug distribution for anti-malarials in Africa. Because in the crates, there's gaps between the necks of the bottles. And they can get these things to little mom and pop places all over. So you stick the drugs in between, phenomenal reuse of that asset. Wouldn't you love to have distribution into every mom and pop shop in Africa? Unilever, you know if you buy a can of chickpeas, there's kind of cloudy water in it. It's actually got a fancy name, aquafaba. And you can reduce it and use it as an egg white substitute to make vegan food. So Unilever have a line which is vegan ready meals, and instead of egg whites, they use stuff they were just pouring away in the chickpea cans. So that's very interesting. There might be waste products or byproducts that you've got that have value elsewhere. And then we've talked about Lego, the adult fans of Lego. Do you know it's really interesting, this adult fans of Lego thing? Lego, being Lego, could go to the best design schools in the world to hire designers. And they did that. And these people didn't really know about Lego. So they designed things that Lego people didn't want to buy. And then somebody said, well, we've got a huge number of adults in our adult user community. Maybe some of them are designers. Why don't we see if we can find some and hire them? And they did that instead, and it took off. Do you get the idea? Okay, usually people just have a few examples. As I say, there's an inventory of lots of different ones and questions you can ask. But just getting the intuition will get you started. Now, I'm going to do the other type and then give you a few minutes to think, but the two kind of go very nicely together. I call these implied resources, and it's similar to what I've just been talking about, but the question is different. The question is, in order for us to do what we do, what must be working? What must be there that we could maybe do something else with? I'll give you some examples and you'll see what I mean. The classic example is Amazon Web Services. Now, I know you're not Amazon, but the same principle works at different sizes. Amazon obviously started out selling books. Then they said, hey, anything that we can list on our website and distribute you through the post, we could sell that. That wasn't the original plan. They realized it as they were going along. And then they realized, hang on, we've built all the infrastructure to do all this e-commerce. We could make that available to other people. That became Amazon Web Services, which half the world seems to run on now. And for a long time was the only profitable bit of Amazon. So you might go, okay, yeah, huge company, Jeff Bezos, etc. What does that mean to me? Well, IO Studios is a software house in Redditch, not very far from here. And they were looking for a CRM system, and they didn't like the ones that were on offer at the time. They found them clunky, and a CRM, if no one uses it, it doesn't matter how good it is in principle. So they built themselves one that looks a lot like Trello. And now there are a lot more systems that are like this. But it was like Trello, like a Kanban, you could move the cards along. And a client one day came in and said, oh, what's that funny bit of software? And they said, oh, it's just something we built for ourselves. It's our own CRM. And the client said, can I try it? Yeah, but we can't warrant that it's going to work very well. It's not industry strength. It's just something we're playing. No, can I try it? Sure. A couple of other clients started trying it, and long story short, they spun it out into something called Sales Radar. One of their clients is Costco now. It's been a really nice business for them. So much smaller, more manageable. It's the same idea as Amazon. It's the same idea as Ocado. Ocado built out all the infrastructure to do online groceries, and then they realized that the platform, the technology, is probably more valuable and less of a competitive market than the British grocery industry. It's called Smart Platform. It's used by Kroger in the US, Casino in France, supermarket, ICA in Sweden. And so by doing this, they turned themselves from a grocer into a global technology business. Kind of interesting. And in case you think it's all about digital, Lotus is also an example of this. Lotus, of course, became famous building light, fast sports cars, Formula One cars. In the course of that, they developed superlative knowledge about automotive suspension systems, because you can't build racing cars unless you're good at that. You can't build these light, nippy sports cars unless you're really good at it. And they realized, hey, that's an asset. And half Lotus's business now is consulting with the major manufacturers on suspension. So it's the same principle again. You reverse engineer yourself. You pull something out of that stack, if you like, and then you see, okay, how can we apply it somewhere else? So let's take just a few minutes again to add to the list you already started with. Let me put Well, here are the two questions on one slide. What resources do we have apart from money that an entrepreneur would love? And what resources must be there in order for us to do what we do? Take a couple of minutes on your own, and then I'll give you a shout, and then you can have a buzz with each other as well. Okay, folks. Again, sorry to interrupt the conversation. Quickly, can we hear a couple of examples? Anybody? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so a few that came out. So one was around the data that we have on how our customers use our product. Right. So their usage, and therefore that itself is an asset that we could be using to help other people, like other clients, etc., understand how they might do it. Another one was the contact data that we have of our customers and leads. So for one of my software businesses, where it's the customer is typically an HR or L&D, that's a whole resource around that market and our understanding of that market that we don't necessarily utilize because we just focus on a specific part. Also the processes that we've built around sales and onboarding and people management and so on, those all represent resources that we could be providing or helping clients with.
These are great examples. Yeah. Cool. And just because you could doesn't mean you should, of course, in your strategy. But for example, knowing about the issues affecting HR and L&D people, that could be golden for another business that wants insights there and ways to differentiate their offerings and so on. So can you see the sort of thought process? Thank you. Maybe one more in a different sort of area.
So we're sort of in commercial property design, construction, etc. So entrepreneurial resources could be our relationships with our. So we have information on people's lease expiries, lease breaks, when they might have a move or relocation, purely so that we know when to fit out their offices. But that kind of information would be really useful to a lot of other service industries in the commercial property sector. And then on the implied resources, because we do interior design, fit out construction, we have a team of really good designers that aren't always fully utilised, that some other people might absolutely love to use their spare capacity. So
I like that one.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll keep moving along. What I would say is, at the beginning, I said, I started out with these stories of people who were looking past the answers that were available to them. And when you start doing this, it's likely that you're not yet catching all the things that you've got. And therefore, what I suggest is, this is a great thing for you to do with your partners, business partners, teams. It's very, very engaging, again, I've found, when you get a whole group of people in a business starting to look at and think about these things. So they start valuing what you do more, which is very useful. They start having to think about, well, what would value be to our customer or to other people's customers? Just gets people thinking in the right sort of way. Sort of way I often hear leaders going, I wish my people were more switched on to customer needs. I wish they were more strategic. This will actually, rather than just talking about abstract words like strategic, it'll actually make them start doing that kind of stuff. And it's fun as well. So there are the three overlaps. The reason those circles overlap is there is no exam. That's a nice thing. There's no exam that says what is the definition of an entrepreneurial resource. It's just for handles, for us to get a grip on what we're thinking about. These overlap with each other. So once you start thinking this way, it doesn't matter which way you found your way into it. Okay. So we're building this list up. Now let's move along to recombining resources to create more value. What am I getting at here? I'm going to show you a little puzzle. If you've seen it before, obviously keep it to yourself. But the idea is that I'm going to be hinting towards an answer, and it'll get progressively easier. And when you think you know what it is, then let me know what you think it is. Okay, so I'm going to show you 4 different pictures. This is obviously a skier. This is a powerboat racing. Some cyclists. I did a talk for a business in Dubai, so I thought I'll put sand in there. Just personalisation we were talking about before. And a toy tank. Okay, a bit less aggressive than the real thing, so a toy tank. So there's those 4 pictures, and you can think of each of those as being 4 different domains, right? Worlds. There's the world of ski racing, there's the world of powerboats, there's the world of cycling, there's the world of tanks, right? And each one of those worlds is a whole thing in and of itself. But my suggestion is there is a 5th world that you can create by pulling elements, but not everything, from each of these 4. And so what I'd like you to do is when you think you've got it, shout it out. If you already know it, then, don't. Okay, so anybody able to look at that now and say, oh, I could pull this from here, that from there?
Yeah.
Go on.
Transportation?
Well, yes, as an abstraction. Anything specific?
Just movement?
Okay, it's not quite, but you'll see in a bit.
Specifically a snowmobile.
Oh, brilliant. Have you seen it before?
No.
Okay.
Oh, you're just too clever.
He just is too clever.
Yeah.
I think you're the only person who's done it at this point.
He cheated.
Topher, you know me well. Am I a person who cheats?
No, not at all.
Okay. Well, that's absolutely fantastic. So I'll show you the way I normally do it. And it's kind of interesting because the people in Dubai did not get it. The people in Canada and Sweden straight away, right? Or not quite as quick as you. So what I normally then do is break it down and say, let's break down the elements. And then I'll go, okay, can you pull anything from each of these and put them together? And of course, you can see, we can pull the skis from the skiing. We can pull the outboard motor from speedboat. We can pull the handlebars from, and maybe the chain from the bicycle. And we can pull the tracks from the tank, right? Again, usually people haven't got it at this point. So then I'll say, well, aren't we supposed to think outside the box? So we'll think outside the boxes. And at this point, I'll go, can you pull anything from it? And then I give them this final hint. And then people get that it's a snowmobile. So well done. Now, this came actually from a guy called John Boyd. I don't know if anybody's ever come across John Boyd. OODA loops, the fighter pilot who changed the art of war. Great summer reading. Topher knows about it if you want to get the reference there. Have you read Coram's book?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So ask Topher or ask me if I'm still around if you like the idea. A guy that was a fighter pilot who then applied what he learned from dogfighting to military strategy, and then business consultants stole his ideas without giving him credit. Really interesting ideas, which we're not going to go into, but what Boyd used to do when he was doing innovation consultancy, he used to talk about people building snowmobiles, that he'd been innovative himself by pulling ideas in this way. So, what is that? Not you. It's Uber. Right, so in this way of thinking, Uber is a snowmobile, right? The cool and interesting thing that I want to point out about Uber is all those technologies, none of them were invented by Uber. They were already there by the time Uber came along. Of course, somebody had to invent GPS and the smartphone, yeah, but Uber didn't. In principle, anybody who could have seen those 4 elements, and anybody who had Kalanick's attitude, which is required to take on the city governance and all that, and the taxi industry. And anybody who could execute could have done it. And that's, I find, really intriguing. So can we build snowmobiles? By combining resources, and that's why we've been looking for resources. So let me give you some more examples of how this can kind of play out. This is actually an example from the forward of the book Rory Sutherland Ogilvie wrote, and he literally heard this story just when he was writing the book. Somebody said to him, there was a young woman in Africa supporting herself by selling hard-boiled eggs to construction workers. And what she realized was, if she added a tomato and some leaves and a few herbs, she wasn't selling a hard-boiled egg anymore. Now she was selling lunch. And the cool thing about that was, she could charge more than twice as much for lunch, even though it didn't cost her anywhere near twice as much to put that on. So that's a kind of alchemy. That is another snowmobile in a way. She's put elements together, but it's magnified the value. So actually, I have this graph in the book. I talk about this idea of value amplification. We're not just trying to do stupid mashups. We're trying to do mashups that create synergy, where as your cost goes in, the value to the customer goes up faster, so you can charge more. and be more profitable. That's an important design criterion to bear in mind. Let me give you a big business example, because that one with the eggs is lovely, but kind of folksy. So Cardinal Health is an American health services provider. One of the businesses that they were in was surgical instruments, scalpels, clamps, all that kind of stuff. It was a commodity industry because their competitors could match their quality. There was nothing to choose, so prices were just, it was just a race to the bottom. And they were going to sell that unit. And then they had a great idea, which was, why don't we go and watch surgeons? We've got great relationships with surgeons. We've got great relationships with the hospitals. We do drug delivery, drug distribution, and, we're well plugged into their networks. Why don't we go and watch surgeons using our stuff and see what happens? And what they found was, on a typical morning, a nurse would get the list of the procedures that day, would have to go to an instrument cabinet and put together on a tray everything that was required for each of those procedures. So the first thing, they had to hope that there were no stock outages, because obviously that's not good. And I actually asked the surgeon, does it ever happen that you go, scalpel or clamp, and it's not there? And it does happen. And that's not good, because the surgeon gets tense. I can never say anesthesiologist. The anaesthetist they don't want to keep the patient under any longer than they need to. Somebody's got to run around the hospital trying to find something. It's not good, right? So therefore, they carry a lot of stock. And this has got to be sterilized, and it's got to be assembled, and then the nurse is doing that rather than nursing, and then so the idea they came up with was surgical kits. They got best surgeons together, and they said, okay, for these different standard operations, what do people need? And so they said, right, it's called pre-source, and that's a pack. What you do is the day before, or 2 days before, you order what you require. If it's a hernia, there's a hernia kit. If it's a stent, there's a stent kit, etc. It all comes packaged. It's all sterilized. There's stuff like gloves and gowns and stuff at the beginning. Then there's the opening instruments, and then there's closing instruments, and then there's sort of stuff for cleaning up. It's in order, just-in-time manufacturing. They're a drug delivery company, so they're very good at meeting short orders and getting them there on time. They're sort of almost like a fifth emergency service type of thing. Using all those resources, they blasted out of that commodity trap. It's a great business for them, and they left the competitors in the dust. Can you see that's a snowmobile in a way? And it's kind of based on those hidden resources of access and the distribution that they're able to do and their manufacturing abilities that they weren't using. Okay, I love that example. Here's a way of thinking about it, which is the way I would usually, and I'm going to get you to do a quick exercise. It's like a car wash, and you're very familiar with this kind of pattern. It's not that I'm suggesting that you offer bronze, silver, and gold in your business. You may well do that already. Fine. I'm thinking about it as you ask yourself the question, if this is bronze, what would silver be? Using our resources and knowing what we know. If this was gold, what would whatever the next one is? People say platinum, but platinum doesn't cost as much as gold, does it? Diamond? Diamond, yeah, okay, etc. And you keep pushing it. So in this particular case, bronze is scalpels, the materials, the gloves, and that gives you high-quality surgical instruments. It's sort of the value. You could obviously go into what the value is in much more detail. Silver, let's add packaging per procedure, and let's add convenient ordering and delivery. And now that bumps up the value because you've got no stockouts, no errors, you've got more time for nursing, better hygiene, maybe even affects things like insurance, premium, and reputation and so on of the hospital. And then the next level, you could add medical waste recycling, and you could add a circular economy thing because all those instruments could be reworked. You see how it goes? So just again, a few minutes, I'd like you to think, okay, a good way to do it, lots of ways to do it, and in the book there are lots of ways to think about it, is just go, here's what we do. You haven't got a flip chart, so I'll just mime it out. Here's what we do, right? What happens before? What are the hassles of setup that happen before? What are the hassles of cleanup afterwards? What else could we do that would enhance this while it's happening? A great way to think about like a business class airline. Beforehand, they might pick you up and get you to the airport. Then they have like the Virgin Clubhouse or somewhere really nice like that, where they might polish your shoes and cut your hair and do all these other things. So they're reducing your hassle and they're speeding you up. While you're in the air, you've got a bigger seat and they serve you better and all of that sort of stuff. And then when you land, maybe you can have a shower and your breakfast and get straight to a meeting in good shape. That's a nice way to think about it as well. Okay, so just think, okay, put my core products or service in the middle. Think about the surrounds. Think about your hidden resources. Can you come up with some bundle of value that is new, that takes you to another level? Just thinking about time, we're doing all right. Here's a few just extra ideas that you can think about. So this is more of a physical product example, but you can adapt it. You can sell the product. You can offer spare parts and consumables. And some people, like Hewlett-Packard, they almost give you the printer because they're going to sell you cartridges for forever, I hope. You could repair the product, but then you could go beyond that. You could maintain the product's performance. So if you get tools from Hilti, they used to sell tools for building sites. Now what they'll do, if you want, is you can order the tool set that you're going to need for a job, and they will keep it replenished and fix anything that breaks or gets stolen and upgrade the kit over the period of the time of the job and so forth. You could go even further. You could advise people on how to get better outcomes. We've talked about that because you learn about lots more examples of your product being used and they can never get that experience. And you can even go further than that and guarantee outcomes. Classic example, Rolls-Royce Power by the Hour, where it's not that you buy the jet engine. What you do is you buy the fact that when the pilot does this, the right thing will happen. And they do everything to make sure that will happen. So those are some ways you can think about adding. But there's no limit, obviously. You're looking for that entrepreneurial spark of something that's a bit different. So have a doodle for a few minutes around what you do. And then I'll give you a shout to again, share.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Not to be able to create more value in the product, not to be able to charge more. This is to be able to add value to the product you have. It's not to be able to bump up the price and charge more.
I don't think it's an either or. I think that, you charge more for an egg by cutting it in half, putting it in with a tomato and so in a way you could say it's that kind of both. If you can find an idea that takes what you do like Cardinal did and transforms your whole business proposition, brilliant. But if you just have a way to find, to put a gloss on a current product and be able to charge more than it costs you to do it, brilliant. There's probably a continuum.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Oops. So have a doodle, have a think. Okay, so hopefully you've got some fantastic new ideas. Just in the interest of time, rather than hearing feedback, and also because I don't want your fantastic new idea to, I want you to be able to keep commercial confidentiality now while you develop it. Let's move on to the next bit. So what have we done? Okay, we've been discovering our hidden resources. We've been recombining those to create new value. And again, that's a process of thinking that now you've started it, you'll find will kind of continue on the sort of back burner in your mind. I'm sure you'll find that. So the third one is let the world teach you what works. How many of you have ever had a business idea and you spoke to somebody else about that idea, and maybe even somebody, a successful entrepreneur, and someone said, oh yeah, they've done very well, why don't you talk to them? But you spoke to somebody else and you told them your idea and they said, nah, I won't bother with that. And then 6 months or 9 months later, you see somebody else has done it and they're making a packet and it's a brilliant idea. Has anyone had that experience? I've seen quite a few. Pardon?
Facebook.
I've seen it happening all the time. I've done it myself. I've seen it happen to friends. So what is a man in a pub? It's somebody who's got an opinion about your business idea, right? And even if they have been very successful themselves, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they know, in fact, almost by definition, that if they've been in one industry or one sector, they may well not be able to see it. So, we have to find other ways to test our ideas out. There's a saying in the movie industry, which I believe William Goldman was the first person to say. He's the guy that did Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the first Stepford Wives. And he was a screenwriter. He said, in the movie business, no one knows anything. Nobody knows which movies will be successful, which movies won't be successful. I mean, nobody thought Star Wars was going to be successful, you know. That's why Alec Guinness got a percentage of the gross, which must be the deal of the century, really, when you think about it. It's the only way he was prepared to do it. So we can't necessarily trust other people's ideas about whether a business. We can't trust what people will tell us either. Let me give you an example. Some of you may know this example. I don't know. Do people know Webvan? Give me a wave. Webvan? Fantastic. Then whatever I say, you'll take as gospel. Okay. Webvan was an attempt in the dot-com boom, the dot-com bubble era, right, to do online groceries. Now, we have online groceries working now, but it actually took people a long time to figure that out. Now, they were in the San Francisco Bay Area. They raised $800 million from people like Sequoia Capital, you know, the famous venture capital house. $800 million to be the first. And they thought that it was going to be like being Google or being Hoover, you know, that people would webvan their groceries. It was going to become the generic. That was what they hoped. So, obviously, they were backed by extremely successful and clever venture capitalists. They did their business plan. It showed the obligatory hockey stick. It was all very founded on... They did market research. People in the Bay Area confirmed, oh, yeah, gee, that would be very cool to be able to get our groceries delivered for an extra $5. So they built a distribution center with the best robotic picking technology circa 2000. They had these web vans with a distinctive shape, so you could see in the distance that it was a web van, even if you didn't see the logo yet. And the revenue never caught up with the investment, and the business collapsed very early. And it's I actually saw an interview with the chief marketing officer, and he said, yeah, we did careful market research, and people said, yeah, we'd love that. But what people tell you and what people do are two completely different things. We've all, haven't we, said we would buy something to a shop assistant, I'll be back later, and then not gone back for various reasons. And all of us have had people tell us that we were definitely going to do a deal, and then it didn't happen. So contrast that with Zappos, online shoe shop now owned by Amazon. What did they do? They went to the local shoe shop, took photographs of the shoes, posted them on a little website. Somebody ordered the shoes. An email came in, and the CEO, well, there's only three people in the business at the time, you know, the CEO, the CTO, and the CFO, with their jumpers with the little holes in the elbows. The CEO went down to the shoe shop, bought the shoes, took them round to the customer, thereby validating what is called in the lingo a leap of faith assumption. If you've read Lean Startup, then you'll be... You know Lean Startup? Some people do. You know how everybody's pivoting all the time these days? Yeah. That all comes, that comes from Lean Startup. And you know how people talk about minimum viable products? That also comes from Lean Startup and from some work by Reese's mentor, Steve Blank, as well. But it's become very diluted about what all these things mean. But this is the basic idea. The basic idea is we have an assumption on which the entire business depends. You can't run an online shoe shop if, for example, you can't get people to give you credit card details online. And we didn't know whether people would do that until the late 1990s, probably. What's the key assumption on which the success of an online shoe shop depends? And if this is false, there's no point. It doesn't matter how clever you are or how nice the shoes are. What would you say the most leap of faith key assumption? They're going to fit. Well, it's about fit, isn't it? Will people be prepared to order shoes that they've not tried on because they might not fit, and then there's a hassle of returns and so on? Before they invested huge amounts of money in a clever business plan, they tested that basic assumption in a cheap and cheerful Wizard of Oz, man behind a curtain type of a way. From the customer's point of view, they had a perfectly acceptable experience. They went on a website, ordered the shoes, and some nice person, very friendly, brought the shoes around. And when they wanted to talk to them about shoes and stuff like that, it was great. From the point of view of what it was required to make that work, it was, sticky back plastic and cardboard. And then they could then invest a bit more. So this is the Lean Startup approach. I don't like the language of minimum viable products because I think what it does is, first of all, people expand it about. One thing is when you think product, you tend to overbuild, which is the point that they're trying to avoid anyway, because, unless it's really a product, You know, people are not happy. And also, the other side of it is people are too minimal and they do something that's crappy. So it's just better to think of it as an experiment. And in fact, the guy that taught me Lean Startup worked with Eric Ries at GE, and he now teaches at Strathclyde Business School. And he says, we just talk about experiments. So it was an experiment. Will people buy shoes off us? And if they will, great. So Wizard of Oz type of an idea. Now, you see, you've just come up with ideas, or you're going to come up with ideas based on all these things. But how do we know they're any good? We could ask a man in a pub, but that's pretty dangerous. They might dissuade us from a really good idea. Or we could ask potential customers, and if they say, oh yeah, cool, I'd buy that, then they might not, they might be just being nice to you. What we want is they've got to behave in a way that shows they've got to do something, and that's the essence of the Lean Startup idea. They put some skin in the game. They give you some data as a minimum. They give you some money. They give you, they sign up to a waiting list. They give you a letter of intent, maybe in a B2B situation. We will buy this if you make it. So here's the breakdown, right? What are the assumptions underlying Zappos? Well, people will trust it's okay to give a credit card. Do we know that's true? Maybe they did buy then. Okay, we see people doing that, fine. They'll risk buying shoes they haven't tried on. Whoops. We better test that before we do anything else. There's no point attracting new customers to a website, which we don't know whether we can do, if when we did it, they then wouldn't buy the shoes anyway. So there's an order, a natural order to this. So we want to test these assumptions in the right order, and this is a good way to do it. You say, okay, which is the highest risk but cheapest to test idea? And then you kind of work with post-it notes to figure it out. So just to give you a quick flavour of this, no more than that, and you can read in the book, in the chapter, Let the World Teach You What Works. It goes into more detail. You can also look at Eric Ries he's got some great videos on online, and his name and reference to his stuff is in the book as well, right? So here's the exercise very, very quickly. List the assumptions on which your idea would depend, the new idea. Think what order you need to test them in. Ask yourself, how would you test the first one cheaply as possible by getting someone to actually have to do something, they have to give something up. Time, data, money ideally, or a promise of money. And then ask yourself, when could I test that? How quickly could I test that? So you don't waste time going down the wrong avenues. I've gone quickly. Does it make enough sense for you to have a quick think about it? Just get the beginnings of the idea? I'll take that as a yes. Have a couple of minutes. Okay, I would have liked to give you a little bit more time on this and have a bit more feedback and so on. That's not going to happen. But you can, obviously, as I say, have a look in the book to get a bit more of an idea. And, think it through with somebody else is really useful. Two, Andy asked a really important question I wanted to pick up, which is there a danger of doing all this sort of thing? You come up with a new idea and you go off to the left and then you maybe, I guess, neglect what you're doing now, or it's a strategic question, essentially. And the answer is there absolutely is a danger that could happen. So you have to kind of keep your big picture strategic hat on. That's why, if you remember, I told you about that software house, IO Studios. When they came up with that CRM and realized that it had a future, they did it as a separate business, separate brand, because the sales conversations are going to be different, the marketing's different from selling bespoke software. So you have to be aware of that and not try and ride two horses. Unipart, which was a parts supplier for the car industry, realized that they were really great at B2B sales. And they actually developed a B2B sales consulting thing under the Unipart brand. So it is manageable, and it worked for them. But, you might say, we've got a fantastic finance function. Why don't we outsource bookkeeping to some, could maybe, but is that really what you want to do? So I think just to be alive to that question is very important. You don't, there are lots of things you could do, and the strategic question is always, of the things we could do, which ones should we do, right? Sometimes you'll find something that is a much better idea, or that really juices up what you're already doing, and that's what we're after. Okay, so just to remind you of all the things we've done very quickly, we've been looking for hidden gold, so easy to overlook it. Then we said, okay, let's take those elements, and can we build snowmobiles with it? And then thirdly, if you come up with an idea, and it is just, assuming it's strategic fit, right? Should we do it? And let's not just ask opinions, not even of prospective customers. Let's test it. And let's use what we've got that works and make sure the idea works. I'll leave you with a sort of, if you only remember one thing type of doing this start with what works stuff with my clients, it turned out to be really engaging, and we thought, you know what, I should do another book, which is what we're going to give you, Committed Action, which is more the culture stuff and building on engagement. This is my favourite sort of coaching tip. So if you forgot everything else, but you used this, I'm sure you would get value from it. I learned it from a football coach who was coaching his own son. And we were on a course, and every Sunday they would play football, and he would speak to his son on the phone, and he always asked these 3 questions. What worked, or what did you do right? He didn't care whether he won or lost, because he was only an apprentice at Bolton Wanderers or something. Who cares whether Bolton Wanderers apprentices win? But he wanted his son to be a professional. So he used to ask, what worked? What did you do right? What improved from last time that you played? And what are you going to work on next? And that is starting with what works. It's a positive way of looking at things rather than what didn't work. Right. So it works great with your employees. It works great as a team if you want to review something like what kind of a week we had. It works fantastically if you're coaching any kind of sport. It works brilliantly with kids if you're trying to raise their self-esteem. Again, not based on boosterism, but based on something that's real. So I leave you with that, and have a great day. You've been great. I've really enjoyed it, and good luck with everything you're doing.